George, during our last conversation, you said, who should read poetry? Anyone who reads should read poetry. You've done so much to bring poetry to working class communities, bringing many wonderful poets into working class communities, and filling halls with 50, 60, 70 people, and sometimes more, all there to hear and to celebrate poetry. And you've encouraged many, many ordinary people to become deeply involved in poetry.
I think we all live a poetic life one way or another. Even Al Capone, there's an odd one. There's a sense of poetry in him. There's a poetry in all of us because there's that second line. As the Old Testament used to show, still shows, not used to, what the Old Testament had for the imagination of poetry was that angel knocking on the door, knocking on the tent of Abraham. Of course there was no one there. But Abraham, in a record of his thinking, had this parallel conversation with himself. He had to put it into someone, and that's poetry. That's the poetry, the abstraction of our sensations. And we have to have a body for it. Otherwise, we go to the institution somewhere. We're talking to ourselves. So my programs with the Live Poets Society, yes, Rockland, Maine, sardine capital of New England. I like that. But the sardine capital was no more because the plants all went out. So I put Rockland, Maine, poetry capital of New England.
And it probably was in terms of the number of people
Well,
you had.
yeah. So the monthly programs at Rockport, starting at the Universalist Church, when I took it over, we used to get 30 to 35 people for...
This is about 1990?
Yeah, I guess it would be about then. Yeah, 1990, maybe even a little earlier. But then after a while, the Universalist Church in Rockland, where the poetry started through Kathy Baker, a member, and asked me to take it over, or I said I would take it over if she dropped it after 3 weeks. I looked around and someone suggested Rockport Opera House. The basement is the Selectmen's community office building. So we rented that. I forget how much it cost. The UU Church charged us, I think it was $60 a month, a meeting. And so we went into the Selectmen's office in Rockport, and the members, and not the membership, but the attendance went up between 50 to 70.
People every month.
Every month.
Coming to the Live Poets
For about
Society.
3 or 4 years, not counting a couple years before that. I would say in the 7 or 8 years I ran the Live Poets, a Wednesday, every first Wednesday of the month, I think it would average out over the 7 years, somewhere around 40 to 45 or so, average out. We'd have big numbers when we had Robert Creeley. We packed that church, 125, and that was it. That was all for Creeley. And one of his students, an elderly retired teacher, a lovely woman. I met her personally. She lived on a little island off Rockland. And the programs were based on, my mentor, of course, people chuckle at this, was Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan, the TVMC of the
TVMC and the New York Globe, the New York News. He was the entertainment editor of Broadway shows. He used to announce, he had an article on entertainers.
So how was he your model for
he had puppets.
Maine Live Poets Society?
He had puppets, hand puppets, puppets on strings, opera singers. He had the Beatles. He had Elvis Presley. He had jugglers. He had balancing acts where 4 people would climb up on top of each other. He had everything.
Variety of it.
Oh, it was a great show, but all professionals. Well, couldn't have a better mentor in my mind. I would have Robert Creeley and I would have a 7th grade student on the same stage. I'd have Wes McNair and maybe have a scat jazz professor teacher from the University of Augusta, Maine come up with three-piece combo and do scat jazz, which I happen to love. I love scat. So, and
Is that is that related to poetry in a way?
sure it is. It's got meter, man. That's the count of language, you know.
Meter, and you're paying attention to the sound of what you're...
That's all the meter part, right? The music. Get out of here, Stan. Stan, will you mind coming over? Listen to that, man. Which one is he going to? Sure, sweet George, I'll be right there. See?
And didn't you have a marble champion?
Oh, I had a boy, I think he was 12 or 13. He was a state... we used to call him Mibbies when I was a kid. I was a good Mibby player. Marbles. And he won the marble contest. And he came. I had the girls tumbling team from Camden YMCA. There were about 20 of them. And that was really dynamic. Those kids would charge into the building with 3 or 4 mats, leaping up and down in little uniforms. Oh man, it was crazy.
So the main focus of the Maine Live Poets Society was poetry, but you had a variety show to help bring people. Why? To bring people in?
No, art. You know, I'd have artists, people hanging on the walls, and they got a little tight around the neck after a while, but I let them loose. But it was always diversity. Maybe we forget about the diversity of life living in rural Maine. But man, you got to go to Boston or Chicago or New York City, and your heart will bleed and you'll cry with happiness with the diversity and the happiness of people walking together, not thinking anything but the charm of being in Times Square. And that's the way I see poetry. If it's the same thing over and over, one sound, what's the musical term for that? That's not monogamy. Monotone. We don't monogamy. I said that on purpose. Monotone. We want diversity. Blues, jazz, quartets,